Welcome, everyone, tuning in live. My name is Kenyatta Robinson. This is the Backyard SmokeMaster Barbecue podcast. When your cook starts going sideways, what do you usually touch first? The vents, the fuel, or the thermometer? We're going to talk about control, not perfection. So what this episode is it's not about brand wars or gadget dependency. We're not talking about chasing exact temperatures. Hopefully, you'll walk away calmer, more confident, and much more consistent. I'd like to invite you guys who are tuning in live to jump into the comments with your questions and comments. We're always trying some new things here on the channel. You may notice that we do have a live poll going. If I can figure out how to look at those results midway through the show, I will do that. I also turned on a feature I see many other live streamers do, the super chat. So I'm hoping to get 5 of those. That will help support this live barbecue podcast, help us keep the fire going, so to speak. So if you're so inclined, would love to get a couple of super chats, and I'll make sure to reward you with either this sound or I'll give you the air horn. All right, either one. All right, but we're going to get into this. This is a jam-packed conversation. And like I said, hopefully by the end of it, you'll come out of this with a lot more confidence in being a lot more consistent. So let me jump in here and see what some of the early people are saying in the comments. Hello to Society Brother Mike Sue, good to see you. Appreciate you. I also see Correctional Officer for Lockdown, and Mike mentioned that we were echoing. Now, let me know, are we still echoing, or did that problem get resolved? I kind of think I know what the issue was, but I hope that I was able to get that resolved. So let me know in the comments. Okay. So let's get started. So first we're going to talk about the core mistake. At the core, the biggest thing, the biggest mistake that you can make with your fire is to basically treat it like a number. And why pitmasters often find themselves getting stuck staring at thermometers. I got a few reasons up on the screen. So numbers feel safer than judgment. A screen feels certain, right? Even when it's incomplete. So you kind of get dependent, on looking at, whatever's on that thermometer, or maybe you're using an app or, another device that's showing you a temperature reading. So that can kind of give you a false sense of security. And, all of these new gadgets, the modern gear that we're using, essentially, it kind of trains panic. When we see fast temperature swings, what it does, it often triggers us to make an overcorrection. So watching data feels like control, but often what it does is it actually replaces the skill of managing the fire. All right, thank you, Mike, for confirming that the sound is good now. Appreciate that. Hello to Kettle Mania, good to see you. And then we've also got Randy in West Virginia. Welcome, one and all. I appreciate you guys. Feel free to jump in the comments, with any questions, comments you have about the topic at hand, or if you have another burning question about barbecue, we've got time and we can tackle that. I think Kettle Mania is answering that initial question that I put up on the screen about, the first thing that you start to mess with when you think things are going awry. Kettle Mania says the vents. Yeah, and that's kind of the obvious one of the obvious first choices. So curious, when you said the vents, are you talking about the intake vents or are you talking about the exhaust vents? Because that can make a pretty big difference depending, they kind of have a different impact on what's happening with your grill or smoker. So curious to know which vents are we talking about. Also, good to see Society Brother Jeff is with us. Appreciate you for jumping in here and catching us live. And I see you guys shouting each other out into in the comments and the chat, and that is great because we definitely are all about building and supporting our barbecue community. So, next up, something that you should always keep in mind, fire, you really need to treat fire as a system. Okay, so fire, it's a balance. There's different things going on. It's basically composed with the fuel, the oxygen, as well as time. All of these components are working together. Adjustments that you make to the fire, they're not instant. Fire responds actually with a delay followed by momentum. And you're going to hear me say that as well as some other things a few times, and hopefully that notion will really stick with you once this episode is over. Keep in mind also, what we really want is stability. Stability beats correction. So fewer, smarter, and more subtle changes that you make during your cook actually help to create control as opposed to making a whole lot of kind of spur of the moment, emotional reacting to what's happening, or big changes that can create a lot of chaos. And we'll get more into that as we dive deeper into this. So, fire management, think of it as a lot like turning a big ship. So not like driving a little go-kart. If you're on a big ship, everything happens just a little later than what you expect. And that's how changes that you try to make to your fire actually, like I said, actually how they occur. It's really kind of on a delayed response. So experienced cooks actually should be thinking about temperatures in ranges. So food cooks on averages. So the short temperature swings that you might experience, those actually rarely matter. Fire moves naturally. So the ranges, if you set a nice range, a range is going to allow you to observe temperature changes without panicking. If we all get that recipe and we see it says, smoke at 250 degrees. Don't obsess about that 250. Give yourself a range, 225 to 275. If it's in there, the average temperature is probably going to be pretty close to that 250 number. So the ranges that you set and, stick to them, it will help you prevent overcorrection. The fewer changes that you make usually is going to lead to much better results. And people often hear me talk about here on the show that one of the most important things I think you need to do when you're trying to really become a great backyard pitmaster is to learn how to manage the fire. And I think the mistake that people make is that they think that it's an impossible task. They think that means, oh, that means I have to be out there constantly tinkering and messing around, doing different things to the vents or to the fire, stoking the fire, or just doing a whole lot of stuff. And that is actually not true. Again, the fewer changes that you do make during the cook is actually going to lead to much better results. So remember, Your job isn't to hold the temp, it's to manage momentum. Now let's talk about fuel management and where the control really starts. So, fuel quantity versus fuel brand. So, I know most of the guys that are watching live right now, you guys are really into barbecue, you love it. And what also ends up happening is, we develop like a brand loyalty, almost to the point where you might find yourself feeling kind of heated if you see somebody make a comment on social media about a brand that you love. So in this case, when we're talking about fuel management, I kind of want you to not get so obsessive about the brand. And actually, what's more important is the quantity, like how much fuel are you actually using? I know one of the big mistakes that I made when I first got started is I was using too much fuel. And that actually is what causes most of your fire management problems. So small and steady feeds actually helps to create more control. And like I mentioned earlier, making big additions actually creates more chaos and has you kind of chasing and trying to fix more issues throughout the cook. So consistency matters much more than labels. That is something to keep in mind. All right, let me see. We got a few more comments coming in. Let me see if I make sure I get to the first comment where we might have a question or something to debate. So, correctional officer says, I look forward to seeing how fire management happens for open live fire cooks. Coal management will probably come into play, especially for a Santa Maria cinder block pit or a cinder block pit. So actually, I would say fire management comes into play no matter what you're cooking on. I mean, I think we kind of think of, the Santa Maria, the live fire, because, it's all right there in the open. So obviously, you're going to be seeing things that you will want to react to. I would actually argue that maybe it's the coals that you can't see that is something that requires more of your attention or being aware of, right? Because you can't actually see what's going on, and you have to work on work with other cues that you might be receiving. Real Meat Stick says, the heat from a barbecue can vary based on factors like the type of fuel used, weather conditions, and the grill's construction. Focusing solely on numbers might not capture those variations. Yeah, I agree completely with all of those comments. And he goes on to say that understanding how to manage flame and smoke is crucial for safety. Focusing only on numbers may cause you to overlook important safety practices, such as keeping flare-ups under control. Another sage point, and obviously we want everyone to be safe and to keep safety. That should always be top of mind as well. And obviously we don't want like a raging fire that gets out of control. That can definitely result into some very unsafe conditions, no doubt about that. So actually, that kind of leads right into my next set of points to go over with you guys. So let's talk about, why adding too much fuel causes spikes in dirty fire. So when you're adding new fuel actually burns dirty at first, and it needs some time to light cleanly. And adding too much can ignite at once, causing fast, uncontrolled temperature spikes or, a dangerous situation, like what Real Meat Stick was alluding to. And, airflow can get disrupted. You're experiencing incomplete combustion, which can create a harsh smoke. Real Meat Stick says, I love open fire cooks. Cinder block pits brings us back to our childhood when we used Lego blocks. It's the simplest way to cook using primitive methods and a fun afternoon project. Absolutely. And, what that always makes me think about, for those of you who are, and dare I say, about that, that whole hog cook that we have talked about here on the channel, for those of you who are inclined to tackle a whole hog cook and you're thinking, I don't have a smoke or a pit large enough to accommodate this whole hog. I'm thinking you can build a cinder block pit. It won't cost you much. You can put that together. I know there's a bunch of videos out there that'll tell you, exactly what to do. That would be a great way to get introduced to doing a whole hog cook. So yeah, cinder block pits, definitely a great option. Dan's Diamond Detailing, welcome to the show. Thanks for jumping in. Says, I need to practice open fire more. I really enjoy indirect in the kettle. Yeah, the kettle, said it many times, the kettle is just a fantastic all-purpose grill that you can get, with low upfront cost, and its versatility and ability to cook in many different ways is probably unmatched. I'm thinking, not only can you do like the 2-zone cooking and you can, indirect, you can set up the coals indirect, you can do high heat direct grilling with it. There are also like Santa Maria attachments that you can get for your kettle, that will allow you to do, that type of live fire cooking. So kettle, just an excellent, I think, grill to have in your arsenal. Okay, so keep in mind then, feed the fire in small, predictable amounts. That will help you have a cleaner combustion, stable temperatures, and predictable control. So again, small additions are going to ignite faster and burn cleaner. It will, like I said, give you more, gradual inputs that will help prevent those spikes and crashes. And then, like I said, predictable control. You'll be able to see and follow more clearly the cause and effect of every change that you introduce. Kettlemania says, I have definitely learned to relax more when all the factors keep me from being exactly on target, but still within range. Yeah, like I said, giving yourself a range to work from, that just takes a whole lot of pressure off, from trying to chase a specific number, a temperature. And yeah, and that's what you want. You absolutely want to have a more relaxed, calm state of mind, because there are going to be other things or things that are going to happen during the cook that maybe you didn't foresee, but you want to be able to make, like calm, rational decisions about any changes or how you need to pivot. Hopefully what we're giving you today is a framework to be more proactive about changes that are needed as opposed to reactive. And what do you know? That's the next thing we're going to talk about. So being proactive versus reactive in terms of your fuel management. So being proactive means that you feed the fire early before temperatures fall or the smoke turns dirty. Reactive means that you're waiting for the problems, and then what ends up happening is you end up overcorrecting with big additions. So, proactive helps you stay in control while if you're if you're performing more from a reactive position, then you find yourself chasing recovery. Real meat, Real Meat Stick says if you're going to use charcoal, my advice is to stick with a lump charcoal. It's real wood versus compressed sawdust and a binder. If your pit allows, supplement in wood chunks or splits for flavor. So that's a pretty interesting comment, actually, because of my own real recent experience utilizing the smoke slinger. So I'm actually going to be putting a tutorial video that'll hopefully be out by this time next week, where I was trying to follow Frank Cox over on the Smoke Slinger channel. He has a video out about doing 90-minute ribs, and which is just a fantastic video because it gives you like the instruction and how to take advantage of the direct heat capabilities of the smoke slinger, to be able to really shorten the time of doing ribs. And I was really interested to see, because I usually do my ribs low and slow. I also have the Liberty 94, which is also made by Smoke Slinger, and this video is not sponsored. But, those are my two latest big smoker grill acquisitions. And I'm as the weather gets better, I've been getting out there more and more. But anyway, I typically do my ribs low and slow, and you're talking, about 4 hours. So I was really curious to see, with the smoke slinger doing them in 90 minutes, direct heat. The big question I wanted to find out, well, one, I've been reading that or hearing that, direct heat ribs kind of have a different flavor profile, like the skin, it kind of has more of a crunch that folks find appealing, so I wanted to experience that. But then most important, I wanted to know, can the ribs actually be as tender if you're doing them in about 90 minutes versus the 4 hour, low and slow approach? And I was amazed. Spoiler alert, the ribs did turn out fantastically tender without needing to wrap. And like I said, I was trying to follow Frank's video almost to a T, because he was actually using charcoal briquettes. Now, in most cases, I'm typically a lump charcoal guy, but Frank did it, using briquettes. I think he said that he was following. I think it was Dustin McCormick is the one that taught Frank, and they were using B&B competition charcoal briquettes. So I don't know. I had great success doing that cook with briquettes, but yeah, normally I'm a lump charcoal guy, but I think there are there's room and there are some situations where the charcoal briquettes come in great handy. So let me jump back into the comments. I see we had some reactions to that. Correctional officer said, like Real Meat Stick alluded to, I know the construction of a grill is very important. That is why I must level up with a smoke slinger from my arsenal, followed by an offset smoker. Yeah, like I said, I'm wholeheartedly endorsing the smoke slinger. It has not disappointed. I haven't done a whole lot of cooks on it. I've mostly been using my Liberty 94 offset, especially for my commercial cooking. But Starting to get my feet wet, so to speak, with direct heat, and really starting to see some benefits of what the smoke slinger can offer. And there are also some other direct heat cookers. I know in the society, one of the society brothers was also asking about the Liberty, not Liberty, but the Lone Star grills. They also have a direct heat cooker, which I think is also, I'm sure is another fantastic option. So love, love, love that we can get these grills that accommodate different cooking styles. So absolutely, I would endorse anyone who thinks they are up for the learning curve of taking on an offset smoker to get one. And yeah, if you really want like what they call the Swiss Army knife of cookers, so far Smoke Slinger is living up to the billing. Real Meat Stick says proactive fuel management, focus on strategic planning and preparation, absolutely, before and during the cooking session, while reactive fuel management is about making quick adjustments in response to changing conditions. Ideally, combining both approaches can lead to optimal cooking results. Yeah, I think what you really want, like I said, being proactive is, and we'll get into like some different scenarios where planning and really being aware of your situation, the conditions that you are cooking in, preparing and doing things in advance will benefit you, and hopefully that will leave you fewer things that you have to react to during the cook. But then, yeah, it's also very important, to really get your chops in, experience different things so that you have a feel for how to react to different things when they come up. I agree, being solid, being good at both will absolutely make you a much, much better pitmaster. Dan's Diamond says, yeah, once you try lump, you really don't go back ever. Yeah, like I said, I think I'm probably lump 95% of my cooks, but I do have some situations where the briquettes can come in handy. All right, correctional officer says, have you noticed the difference in taste, texture of ribs that are hung in a drum smoker? I can't really answer that question because it has been a really, really long time since I've hung ribs in a drum smoker. I have mostly been laying my ribs flat on the grate in a drum smoker. And that's because the last few times I did hang them, what I didn't like was, the bottom portion of my ribs being so close to the fire that, they were cooking much faster than the rest of the ribs. And I didn't particularly care for that. I will say, I think it kind of depends on like the size of your drum smoker and how far away, if you're hanging them, how far away are you able to have the meat away from the charcoal basket can make a big difference. So I do look forward to doing like another cook where I hang ribs, and then I can speak to whether or not I notice a difference in taste. And I don't know if any of you guys who are watching have any experience with that too. All right, so let me jump into the next slide, and I'll be sure I'm not going to miss any of these great comments. Definitely appreciate, the comments that you guys are putting into the chat. Outstanding. Okay, so getting back to again fuel management. So really, the main principle that I'm trying to convey here is that consistency, cooks better than intensity. So steady heat, if you can manage and maintain a pretty steady heat, that's a better way to go than super hot heat. And stable fires are going to burn cleaner. They produce better smoke, better overall flavor, and being in control beats speed. So nothing that heat creates, I'm sorry, rushing heat can actually create problems later on in the cook. All right, let me get back to this. Real Meat Stick, because we got some good commentary going on here about drum smokers. So Real Meat Stick says, I have 2 brands of drum smokers. They are excellent cookers, and hanging your ribs or meats is so good. Try an Argentinian cook this way with a pineapple. I concur. You know, the drum smoker, I have the Hunsaker. I also have a pit barrel junior. I used to have the regular size pit barrel. Um, but yeah, I have consistently found that the food produced in the drum smoker is outstanding. And what I love about drums, they're really easy. They're just really easy. Once you get a few cooks under your belt, and when you do get that temperature dialed in, like we've been talking about having a range, I find the drum smoker is gonna be really easy, to keep those temperatures within your range, and you barely have to make any adjustments to them. I really feel like drum smokers are kind of underrated because nowadays we just see, so much attention, given to, pellet grills and, smart technology, incorporating smart technology into the cookers. Like, I digress, but I know for 2026, Weber, I noticed, is coming out with a lot more smart technology and trying to give you more accessories to incorporate it into like kettles. I think they're coming out like with some type of a ring. I forget the exact name of it, but some type of a ring that I think incorporates like their version of kind of like the meter. Did they buy meter? I feel like they bought a pretty large uh, wireless thermometer company. I'm not sure. Maybe it's meter, maybe not. I could be wrong. But anyway, I know that they seem to really be pushing this year, incorporating smart technology into these tried and true, like charcoal grills, like the Performer and the Kettle. But yeah, the drums are great. Good old fashioned cooking, not overly fancy. Get a good reliable thermometer on it and just watch that temperature sit in the pocket, and you don't have to do a whole lot. Kettlemania says Frank's current podcast season has some great info on smoking and pit management. Yeah. Great channel. They're doing some great things on the Smoke Slinger. That's what I really appreciate, and what attracted me to both the Smoke Slinger and the Liberty 94 is I appreciate that Frank makes really detailed videos, really, showing you how to utilize these cookers and get the most out of them. That's something I appreciate the support, when a company does that. It shows that they really, they really care, and they really want you as the consumer to get the most out of your investment. So I definitely appreciate that. Jeff says, I use primarily briquettes. I like lump for higher temperature cooking, but low and slow, I like the steady burn of briquettes. And I don't think you're alone in that. I think that's kind of a common perspective or a common view. I know you'll see a lot of content where people will say, yeah, for high heat, because lump does typically burn hotter, it also burns faster. But yeah, for high heat grilling and then high heat cooking, go lump. And then if you want like low and slow, you're doing a long overnight cook and you really want to dial in steady temperatures, briquettes would be the way to go because each briquette should burn consistently. You know, they're exactly the same shape, made out of the same stuff. They should burn consistent. Whereas, you know, lump charcoal, each piece is kind of like a snowflake, right? Each one is going to be a little bit different in shape and size and thickness and all of that. So each one is going to burn differently. So you have a lot easier time predicting how things will burn with briquettes as opposed to the lump. Kettlemania says, I'm a briquettes guy too. Yeah, for me, it's easier to anticipate. Real Meat Stick agrees with me about drum smokers. The solution is using a diffuser plate. Yeah. Yeah, he's saying use a diffuser plate, you know, like when I was talking about, you know, the ribs being too close to the charcoal basket. Um, yeah, I absolutely wholeheartedly think that you should use a diffuser plate um, with your drum smoker. I know for me, for my Hunsaker, not really a diffuser plate, but they have what they call the vortex that sits on top of the charcoal basket. Um, so I think it does kind of give you some diffuser plate qualities. Maybe it's kind of like what they consider to be like their version of a diffuser plate. Um, let's see. Correctional officer says, Jeff, I see there's a large Huntsman that's on the market. I remember we discussed that they would probably market one. Oh man. Um, Huntsmaker, that is another hot uh, grill, you know, grill smoker, kind of like a combination, like a larger kettle, but it kind of has like um, ceramic cooker, Kamado type properties. And I know when I first looked at the Huntsman, that was kind of one of my questions was just about the size. So I'm totally not surprised at this point if they have come back out with a new one. Now, Real Meat Stick says Blackstone bought Weber. Okay, actually, I thought it was the other way around, but or maybe you're right. But it seems like Weber is kind of like the more of the forefront brand. But I do remember a transaction between those two companies. Wow, loving all the comments. Kettlemania says I hung ribs a few times, but have gone back to laying flat. Can't say I noticed a flavor difference. Yeah, I would, you know, I kind of agree that I have not yet noticed a flavor difference as well, you know, when it comes to laying ribs flat in my drum smoker as opposed to hanging. But, you know, that was kind of the initial attraction of getting a drum smoker because it just looks so darn cool, you know, to hang the meat in there. But I know I have been doing a lot more laying flat and totally enjoying the results inside of my drum smoker. All right, guys, if you are getting value out of this video, please take a moment, hit that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss a thing. Oops. And then also make sure that you keep commenting. Love the comments and the engagement going on inside of the community. We also have a poll that I set up, and let's see, on the YouTube side of things. So if you haven't gotten a chance take the poll, and then later on, I'll see if I can figure out how to look at the results. Like I said, we're always trying something new here. And again, if you are so inclined, help the weekly barbecue podcast keep thriving and send me a super chat. I'd love to get one, but no pressure. All right, let's keep it going. So, talking about now airflow, which is often, I think kind of the most overcorrected variable. So try and follow these rules. I know earlier someone mentioned, that one of the first things that they adjust are the vents. And I was asking, so when you say the vents, are you talking about the intake or the exhaust? So generally, what you really should try to do is keep your exhaust open throughout the cook. It'll keep the smoke moving and helps keep the fire cleaner. The intake is going to control the fire, adjust the air going in, but you don't want to be messing with the smoke going out. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll make adjustments at the exhaust, and that can actually trap problems. If you're already experiencing dirty smoke and unstable heat, closing off the exhaust is just going to kind of seal the deal. So making small vent changes is really what you want to do. It matters more than people think. The vents are multipliers, so small moves are going to change the airflow more than you think. So a lot of times you'll hear content creators, when they're talking about, when they're making these videos, they'll talk about making small micro adjustments. That's really what you want, as opposed to, making these big changes at the intake vents. So again, as I mentioned earlier, when you make these changes, you're not going to see immediate, the fire isn't going to react and change immediately. There's going to be a delay. The effects that you make, the changes that you make, the effects are going to show up minutes later. And again, over adjusting really just ends up stacking the mistakes. So remember, tiny changes are going to be better than big swings. And the danger of rapid vent swings is that the fire can't respond instantly. You end up chasing the lag and not fixing the problems, and your airflow gets unstable. So again, these swings, things that you make, kind of big moves, big changes, adjustments you make, they create spikes. They can create dips in temperature, and maybe worst of all, they can create dirty smoke. And remember, the smoke is another ingredient. So we want to add a clean smoke flavor to our food, not a dirty, bad one, because it won't taste good. So important is, think of patience, that virtue, patience as a skill, but not necessarily as a personality trait. So we want to develop patience as a skill. I'll say it again. Fire reacts on delay. Waiting lets the changes fully register. Patience helps to prevent you from doing some overcorrecting. The fewer moves you make, the better control. And ultimately, your confidence grows with restraint. When you see that you're making fewer changes or smaller, less dramatic changes, and the reaction, the response, the food that you end up producing, it's going to help your confidence. And as someone mentioned earlier about, becoming more calm cooks produce better results. All right, now I just see I got a super chat did come in. Let's see. All right, let me give this some attention. So this is from Society Brother Jeff. Jeff gave us our first super chat on the live stream. Appreciate you, Jeff. Really do appreciate you. Matter of fact, that deserves an applause. All right. Definitely appreciate that. That is great. That is awesome. Okay, I did get a question from correctional officer. He said, what about a kettle grill vortex? Is it overrated in terms of effective heat control? Okay, now I'm not sure that I'm familiar. Now, I'm thinking, is this an accessory that we're talking about? A kettle grill vortex. So I don't know. Not too sure about that one, but let me know if you guys are familiar with a kettle grill vortex. I haven't come across that one. Let's see. Okay, and then Jeff says the Huntsman has been great. He highly recommends it. Yep, and I know Jeff has talked about this during our live meetups inside of the Backyard SmokeMaster Society. I know he's been really, really happy with his Huntsman. And I mean, I might be speaking out of turn, but I do think that that is probably Jeff's probably most utilized out of all of his cookers. I think it's probably the Huntsman, and I want to say the Weber Smoky Mountain might be in second place. Okay. Pedro says, hello, I plan to put a spider venom on a Weber Summit Kamado S6 charcoal grill center to make completely digital. Should I not do that? Ooh, that's a great question. You know, I honestly feel like you can be okay either way. So the spider venom, that is made by it's made by the same folks that make the Huntsman, which we've been talking about. So I think that was kind of like their foray into barbecue, or at least how many of us first became familiar with them. It's through the spider venom, which is like it's a digital temperature fan operated controller that works with an app that makes it really easy to dial in the temperature on your cooker. Now, I think the reason why I think you could be fine either way is because the Weber Summit Kamado is not difficult to cook on. Pretty similar to the drum smokers. Once you dial in the temperature on a Summit Kamado, it locks in pretty good too. I actually think that it's like, if I were to compare in terms of ease of cooking, the Summit Kamado versus like a Weber kettle, maybe versus like a Big Green Egg or a Kamado Joe, I would say that in terms of ease of use, I would say the Summit Kamado would be the easiest. You know, as Real Meat Stick mentioned earlier, a lot has to do with, you know, the construction of your cooker. Kettles are going to be, it's a thinner, it's made from porcelain, and it's a thinner material. The Summit Kamado, if I recall, is like a double walled cooker. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but you know, the kettle, because of that thinner construction, is more prone or subject to bigger temperature variations through the cook. In that situation, I think the spider venom would be a big assist. Your ceramic cookers like a Kamado Joe or Big Green Egg, I think once you lock in the temperature, you're going to be good. They hold temperatures really well, but if for some reason you overshoot, one of the downsides is that it takes a while, to correct and get the temperature back down. So I think in that respect, they are also can be a little more challenging to cook on. Summit Kamado, I own one. Um, Really easy, really easy. I think if you cook on it a few times, you'll get good experience, and I think you'll be able to really dial in temperature. So I don't think you really necessarily need one, but I'm confident that if you did add a spider venom to a Summit Kamado, you'll just make a great cooker even greater. So that's kind of my long-winded take on that. All right. Uh, Kettlemania says only fire makes a great smoker extension for kettles, adding space between the charcoal and cooking grate, allowing for hanging or laying flat, similar to drums or the Weber Smoky Mountain. Okay, that's good to know. Only Kettle, it makes some great accessories. I know they also make like a rotisserie accessory for the kettle. And again, as I talked about earlier, the kettle is just a fantastic cooker to have in your arsenal because it is so well supported, not just by Weber, but by just a lot of different third party companies. And they're always innovating and coming up with new and great ways to utilize the kettle. All right, let's talk about the getting back to the airflow being the most overcorrected variable. Let's talk about vent adjustments. And just as a rule of thumb, and really consistent with what we've been talking about, if you find that you do need to make an adjustment, don't make a whole lot of adjustments at the same time. Make one small change, wait 10 to 15 minutes, and then evaluate what happened, give it time before touching anything else. So what we don't want to do is, compound the problem by making so many changes that we don't know, you know, which change I made impacted this or caused this to happen. So make small changes, give yourself time to see exactly what happened. And remember, these changes are not going to result in immediate visible changes that you will see. It's going to take some time. Now let's get into reading the fire. The fire, it gives us some definite cues. So starting with the smoke color and what it's telling you. So you always hear people talking about, the highly sought after thin blue smoke or that light haze. So what that represents is clean combustion, and it means that your fire is healthy. Now, if you're seeing white, billowy smoke, it means that the fuel is lighting or the airflow is restricted. Now, if your smoke is gray or acrid, that means that the combustion is incomplete and your fire probably needs some attention. No visible smoke. And this is the one that when I'm cooking on my offset smoker, this is usually the one that I know when I can barely see the smoke, I'm feeling pretty good. It means the fire is hot and clean, and that's not a problem. And then probably the worst one is if the smoke is dark or sooty, it means that you have a serious airflow or a fuel issue. So pay attention to those visual cues. The smoke quality tells you more about the flavor than the thermometer ever will. All right. And then more cues. The smell of your fire, what your nose is telling you. If the smell that you're detecting is clean, neutral, or lightly sweet, that means the fire is probably burning nice and clean. If it's sharp, bitter, or what my goodness, eye burning, it means you probably have dirty combustion going on or an airflow or fuel issue. And then if it's a heavy wood smell, especially if you're cooking on an offset, it just means that the fuel is probably not fully lit yet. And we also have some sound cues that you can pay attention to. Soft, steady crackling sound means that you have a balanced, stable fire. If you can hear aggressive roaring, it probably means there's too much air and the fire is probably running too hot. When you hear a popping and snapping, it's kind of a mixture, or I'm sorry, it could be like moisture, or the fuel is just igniting unevenly. And if it's super dead quiet, especially on an offset, it may mean that the fire is starving for air or fuel. Okay, before I move on, keep up with these comments. Real Meat Stick says, I have a Weber Summit Kamado. It's been a great variable live fire cooking, great for hot and fast barbecue. That's an interesting comment. At least interesting to me, because I also have a Weber Summit Kamado. And I have made, a few videos where I've compared it or pitted it against other cookers. I'm thinking of, there's like one I have comparing it to the Weber kettle, one that compared it to the to my drum smoker, and then also to my Kamado Joe. And inevitably, what always ended up happening is, get a nice, clean, solid cook on the Summit Kamado, good flavor. But when we were talking about the smoke flavor, my wife Janine and I frequently found that whatever we pitted the Summit Kamado up against in terms of smoke flavor, we thought that other cooker produced more of the smoke flavor. And I've heard a lot of theories about why that is. I think kind of boiling down to, I don't know, the efficiency, of the Summit Kamado, and that it's producing this really clean fire, is one of the big advantages. So for smoking, kind of finding that other cookers were outperforming it for smoke flavor. And Real Meat Sticks comment, I'm going to put that back up. He mentions that it's a great variable live fire cooker, which I haven't really tried to use it as a live fire cooking, but then he also says it's great for hot and fast barbecue. Yeah, high temperature cooking, grilling. I can definitely concur that that's one place that it really shines. Love doing party wings on my Summit Kamado, and I like to use the Vortex accessory on that because it really allows me to direct the heat. Like, it's offset, kind of like indirect cooking, but it directs that heat around the perimeter of the Summit Kamado and really produces some great wings. I wonder if maybe if that was kind of in line with what correctional officer was asking about. I have used the Vortex accessory with my kettle, and similar, got great results. Matter of fact, for me, I feel like the Vortex accessory is one of my favorite overall accessories for the kettle, because it does really promote a nice, good, hot and fast barbecue. Yeah, so maybe that's what correctional officer was talking about, and of course now I see in the comments. I think that's what he was asking about, because I'm getting confirmation. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. This if I can say it, cylindrical piece in the middle that keeps all the charcoal in the middle. Yeah, that's exactly the accessory that I'm thinking of. Um, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I was kind of wondering about this when we got that question about the spider venom. I wasn't sure if they make a Venom, if they make one that fits with the Summit Kamado, because going off of memory, I believe the Summit Kamado is a 24-inch cooker. The kettle, Weber kettle, the probably one of the more common sizes for the kettle is the 22, and they definitely support the 22 with the spider venom. So I'm not sure. The carpenter says I use a Hunsaker Vortex on my Weber kettle often, great for party wings, chicken thighs, and drums as well. Now I know Hunsaker makes accessories for the Summit, I mean, for the Weber Smoky Mountain. Um, and I'm kind of thinking maybe this is the same accessory that they have available. So yeah, he's saying he uses it often on his Weber kettle. A lot of great comments. Okay. Uh, Pedro says, I emailed the folks from Spider Venom and was advised that their controller is compatible with the Summit. Okay, that is good to know. Good information. And Jeff says, that's great. The Venom controller is great. I found it works as advertised and highly recommend getting the battery with it. Yeah, that way I guess you don't have to worry about having it plugged in. So, okay. Uh, let's see. Okay, Kevin says, I barely made it in. I just put a smoked brisket in my sous vide bath and put it to bed till tomorrow's dinner. All right, we always are gonna celebrate. Always gonna celebrate folks who tackle that brisket cook, because I know I've got some people watching. I'm not gonna name names who have not yet tackled the brisket cook. I would say you're armed with all this information. You've got the cooker. It's time. 2026 is the year. Do that brisket cook. Okay, and Pedro says, I get my new Summit Kamado next week. All right. Well, congratulations. I think you will really enjoy the Summit Kamado. I think bang for a buck, versatility, ease of use. Definitely one of the best cookers that you are going to be able to get. And I'm glad that you're getting some good information from this. Again, we do this show every week, same time, same platform. So please come on back. All right, let's keep it going. I still got some more information for you guys. So here's the question: when should you trust the thermometer and when not to? So trust the trends, not moments. Averages, we talked about this earlier, temperature averages matter more than the spikes that you might experience. Question the numbers during changes. When you add fuel and you make vent moves, that's going to distort the readings, the immediate spikes that you see, changes in temperatures, so that's what you don't want to trust. And trust the fire first, the smoke, the smell, those cues we talked about, and ultimately the food is going to tell the full story. All right. Okay, so again, fire intuition isn't talent, it's repetition. Cook often. The more cooks you do with fewer adjustments, the better your judgment gets. So now let's talk about some real world fire scenarios. Overnight cooks. We all, like Pedro getting that Weber Summit Kamado, he's probably thinking about the time when he's going to be able to tackle an overnight cook. Maybe he's going to do a brisket or a pork butt and do it overnight. So again, we talked about being proactive. So things that you want to think about and plan, as Real Meat Stick said, planning is important. The fuel setup. Load and arrange your fuel for a long, steady burn if you're cooking overnight. Have airflow discipline. Lock in the vent positions before walking away, and do a fire health check. Look for that clean smoke, steady sound, and stable trends before you go to sleep. Let's talk about another scenario: wind and cold weather. So, if you know your conditions are windy and cold, shield the cooker, block the wind to prevent airflow spikes and heat loss. Even if you have to reposition, your smoker so that that wind isn't gusting into the intakes. Plan for higher fuel demand if it's really cold. I know a lot of the country been experiencing a bitter, cold winter, a lot of snow. So plan, if you're going to be out there cooking, and we do say barbecue is year-round around here, plan for higher fuel demand. Cold weather burns fuel faster. Start with more and try to avoid having panic situations where you're having to add a lot of fuel midway through your cook. And again, try to lock in the airflow early. Cold air coming into your grill, your smoker, it's going to magnify the vent changes that you make. So try and set them conservatively. And like we talked about earlier, make those changes and wait. Be patient. Another real world situation where you find that you have to open the lid. Well, first of all, try not to open the lid too often. We've all heard that saying, if you're peeking, you ain't cooking. So remember, the lid is actually the biggest vent. Opening it resets the whole system. The recovery is going to take some time. So don't expect, if you open the lid and close it, don't expect the temperature to instantly recover, and don't try and chase it. Don't try and chase that temperature. Give it some time, be patient, and see how the temperature recovers. And if you're going to be opening the lid, open with purpose. Don't just open because you're curious and you're trying to get a picture, for your social media or something. Open with purpose. Curiosity can create problems. And again, I'll say it again, the lid is the biggest vent on your cooker. So you got to make sure that you treat it with respect. Kettlemania says this has been an excellent topic tonight. Very useful common sense items to remember as we're out managing our fires and pits. Thank you. Pedro says, oh, hit the wrong item. Wait a minute. There it is. Pedro says the spider venom also supports the 26-inch kettle with an attachment. Okay, that's good to know. So basically, spider venom sounds like no matter what size kettle you have, maybe outside of the ranch, there's a spider venom available for you. That is good to know. Real Meat Stick says, trust the thermometer. Yeah, when cooking a steak to doneness. Absolutely. So rare, medium. We've talked about this often as well, right? One of the first accessories you should buy, I think, is a good instant read thermometer. They don't cost much. You can get them for like $20. Gives you instant feedback. don't be guessing, with your internal temperature. So when I said, trust the fire, not the thermometer, I'm talking about like the ambient temperature of the cooker or the built-in thermometer on your cooker. You know, trust the fire, trust your instincts, trust those cues, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, looking at the smoke. Trust those things more than, my ambient temperature reading is 275 degrees or it spiked up to 330 degrees. Now I have to do something. So again, averages, that type of thing. But as far as like cooking to food safety, absolutely no reason why you should be guessing, fooling around. Get a thermometer where you can check the internal temperature of your meat. And absolutely, that's where you trust your thermometer. So that is a great point that Real Meat Stick makes. Here's a good one too. And I also recommend this. Pedro says my wife bought me the Typher Gold Quad for Christmas. Yeah, I also got that same wireless probe system. I feel like it's highly underrated. Keep hearing everybody, talking about the meter, ThermoWorks RFX, which is also very good, but don't sleep on the Typher Gold Quad wireless thermometers. I love the fact that it comes with like a handheld display that you can walk around with and actually see the temperature readings, so you don't have to be, messing around with an app. They do have an app, but you don't have to use it. They've got the handheld temperature uh, display unit. And then I also love that the probes are numbered. I can't tell you, it's a simple thing, but it really makes a difference in being able to kind of keep track. Like if you're using multiple probes at once, being able to say, okay, number one is inside of the breast of my chicken, number two is inside the thigh, number three is in my pork butt. Being just able to quickly look and see that number on the probe itself makes a big difference. So I agree, or I do recommend the Typher Gold Quad, and big props to your wife too. Getting you a great accessory. You got the Summit Kamado coming. You're in good shape. Good shape. Yep. Curiosity killed the queue. Opening that lid too much can really lead to problems. Another endorsement for the Typher thermometer. Let's see. Pedro says that is one of the reasons that I wanted that spider controller, because you can pulse the fan when you open the lid, and when you close it, the fan will blow until you can get back to your set temperature. Yeah, that sounds like a good feature as well. I do have one of our society brothers was so gracious to send me his spider controller that fits on the kettle. I just haven't had time to get it hooked up, but that is one of my goals for this year, is to hook up that spider controller so I can really see how it works and give you guys some feedback on it. But everything I've heard is that it's excellent. I'm also aware, or I know from my own experience, that there are some other fans that also have like a feature where you can pulse the fan or run it consistently. So that this seems to be like a feature that I don't know who was the first, but that seems to be a feature that is being replicated. Okay, continuing. So another real world fire scenario, adding fuel mid cook. Again, be proactive. Add early, not late. Feed the fire before your temperatures crash. So I guess that's kind of like a reactive type of thing. Like if you see and you notice your temperature is starting to dip, or you have experience and you know, sometimes you just know that you're gonna need to add some fuel at a certain point, depending on what type of cooker you have. You wanna be proactive in reacting to that situation before it's something that you end up having to overcorrect. Remember to add small amounts. That helps avoid spikes and dirty smoke. Give it time, let it settle, wait before you make any other changes. So, the repeatable loop, or the thing to remember: observe, decide, adjust, wait. And remember, restraint equals mastery. The more restraint that you demonstrate in resisting the temptation to make a whole bunch of changes all at once, or make this really big change, will make you a better pitmaster. So again, fire control as a skill is a skill that you practice. It's not a trick that you learn once. Once you really start to get a handle on solid fire control practices, you will be a much better pitmaster over the long run. All right, before we get out of here, I want to give you guys an opportunity. What's your biggest fire management struggle right now? And again, you don't have to go through this struggle alone. A lot of love the camaraderie and the helpfulness that everyone's demonstrating tonight. This is what we do inside of the Backyard SmokeMaster Society. It is free to join. If you've got a phone, a handy phone, or maybe even take a picture of that QR code, you go to backyardsmokemaster.com/society. It'll take you a minute to sign up. And this is what we do all the time inside of the society. It is growing. It's getting better with each additional person that comes on in, as we love to share information and help each other out. So hope to see you guys over in the society. So again, what is your biggest fire management struggle right now? All right, and while I give you guys a chance to answer that question, let me see if I can figure out what's been going on inside of the YouTube. If I can figure out the poll, that's really what I want to see. So hold on, bear with me as I try to, this is new for me here. Might have to. Okay. All right, here we go. Hold on. All right, so the question was, I had it. Okay. Sorry, let me get it together, Kenyatta. What stresses you out most during a cook? And in the poll, 35% said temperature spikes, and that's tied with temperature drops. So both had 35% of the responses. Opening the lid came in at 24%, and dirty smoke got the remaining 6%. So those are that's the tally. So the thing that stresses you guys most out during the cook is when you see those temperature spikes or temperature drops. And yeah, so that doesn't really surprise me. And hopefully by what we've talked about tonight, again, when you see those temperature spikes, that you don't panic, because you're gonna get some spikes during the cook for a variety of different reasons. So again, as we talked about earlier, the thing that you should be most concerned about is the average temperature during your cook is way more important. The temperature spike that you get is not that important. Now, if you get a temperature spike and then you see that the temperature doesn't correct or it just stays up there, then maybe you do need to make some type of an adjustment. But when that spike first happens, you generally don't have to react. Resist that temptation, that urge, to make some quick change. Give it a little bit of time. Be patient. And then again, that other one, temperature drops. Now I feel like that's more something that you kind of have to get that feel, that rhythm, feel for how your cooker is cooking so that as we talked about, anticipating when you're going to need to potentially add more fuel. So again, hopefully what all of this is doing is giving you, tools and information to be able to handle these situations. And I agree, Kevin. It is interesting and kind of funny that both of them tied at the top of the poll at 35%, and because they're kind of like the two sides of the coin, right? So that is pretty interesting. So I thank you guys who are tuning in live for participating and completing the poll. Love it. Okay, so the next live episode will be back next week with another great topic, February 11th, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Pedro says, I saw several of your videos with the Summit Kamado, and that made me want to get one. Well, thank you so much for sharing that information. And that's really my goal. Even though I'm not sponsored by Weber, I won't get any kickback from them. But, is really to just help the barbecue community get more information. And I did my Summit Kamado, especially a series of Summit Kamado videos. I was one of the first ones to get the Summit Kamado. The Summit Charcoal had been out, I think, for a year. That was their initial version. And, I think Weber had some things that they needed to correct. If I recall, pricing was pretty high on the Summit Charcoal. And there were some other, some more other technical issues that they changed. And they made some changes generally, I think, to help bring the price more in line with what folks might pay for, like, say, a Kamado Joe or something, to make it a little more competitive. When they made those changes, for me, it was a no-brainer because I had been kind of wanting one, but I just didn't want to pay that price. So I was amongst the first to pull the trigger when I saw the Summit Kamado made some videos. So kind of like let people see my journey, my experience with it. And yeah, I'm really glad that you found the video to be helpful. Really, really happy about that. The Smiling Family, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for leaving a comment. Don't be a stranger. The comment is, I think both situations are similarly common because the cause is often the same. For example, stepping away from the fire for a little too long can cause both. Yeah, some similar things can definitely have the same type of effect. And I would say that fortunately, we do have just the abundance of tools, to help keep track of the ambient temperature that's happening. But then again, I also feel like the more you cook, the more practice you get, the more cooks you get under your belt, I feel like you kind of develop, you develop like a sense, a sense of when things are going to need to happen necessarily. I know for me, you just kind of, it's that intuition, something tells me, okay, I know I need to go back, you know, and check on things, before something, bad happens necessarily. So I like that kind of again falls into that being proactive bucket. Let's see. He says it definitely was high. Yeah, the price. He says I have a Summit charcoal. Honestly, yeah, the original version of the deflector plate of the charcoal and the propane starter are both really nice to have. Yeah, hold on, let me go back here. Yeah, that was one of the more controversial changes that happened um, when they changed from the Summit charcoal to the kettle. They changed the deflector plate, and I remember that being one of the biggest complaints. I'm trying to remember. I think the Summit charcoal. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the deflector plate on the Summit charcoal has a hinge, if I'm not mistaken, and then you can allows you to access and add fuel without having to remove the deflector plate. I feel like that was the change. It's been so many years, it's hard for me to remember. I remember I felt like I understood why they made the change, to help bring that cost down. And it wasn't a deal breaker for me, mostly because I felt like the size of the Summit Kamado and the amount of fuel that it holds. Like I cannot think of a single time where I needed to add fuel midway through the cook on the Summit Kamado. I mean, you can get a lot of charcoal in there and it'll last. So for me, that wasn't really a big issue. And then yeah, the propane starter. Yeah, I think it's nice to have, but again, I felt like I could handle it, without that. Okay, we got some more information about that deflector. Um, the Smiling Family has the cart version. Yeah, the cart version is the one that had the propane starter. And he's saying that the deflector on the Summit charcoal has an air gap. And yeah, Pedro says the older version had two hinges. That's right. I think it had the hinges on both sides, one on each side. Well, all right, guys, this has been a great, great episode. Again, I really do appreciate, the comments that we had all night long. Um, really outstanding. And for those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, um, really glad that you are here. And I hope again that you go ahead, hit that subscribe button. And again, we're here every Wednesday evening, 6 p.m. Pacific time. So make sure you come on back. Hold on, I'm trying to get my there we go. Trying to get that back on the screen. So yeah, next Wednesday, February 11th, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks again. All right. If you missed any part of this episode or any of our other podcasts, you can always catch the replays up on YouTube. And then the audio version. Sometimes I'm a little slow getting the audio version over to the major podcast platforms, but eventually they do make it over there. So if you're just riding around in your car and you want to get further educated about barbecue, I welcome you to listen on any of the major podcast platforms. And if you do go over there, do me a favor and leave a review. That'll really help us out as well. So thanks again for tuning in. This is Kenyatta Robinson signing off on the Backyard SmokeMaster Barbecue podcast. Take care, and I will see you next week.